On January 28, 2026, Microsoft reported quarterly earnings that beat Wall Street expectations on both revenue and profit. By all traditional financial metrics, it was a moment for the technology giant to take a victory lap. But the market did not cheer. Instead, the stock plummeted 10% in a single trading session. Over $350 billion of market value simply evaporated into thin air. That violent reaction tells you something incredibly important about the state of the technology industry. Investors were not reacting to the numbers Microsoft reported. They were reacting to the terrifying reality that Microsoft accidentally revealed. The company that has maintained a near absolute monopoly on personal computing for 4 decades is quietly suffocating under the weight of its own ambition. Microsoft is pouring tens of billions of dollars into artificial intelligence infrastructure, desperately trying to construct the future. But the foundation they are building upon is fundamentally fractured. To understand how one of the most powerful corporate empires on Earth arrived at this precipice, you have to rewind to the deal that was supposed to secure their dominance for the next century. In early 2023, Microsoft announced a staggering $13 billion investment in OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT. The media immediately crowned it the deal of the decade, but the glowing headlines omitted a crucial, highly irregular detail. A massive portion of that historic investment was not actually cash. It was Azure cloud computing credits. Microsoft was essentially handing OpenAI billions of dollars in vouchers, redeemable only at Microsoft's own data centers. They booked the massive arrangement as a strategic investment, and then turned around and collected the revenue when OpenAI used those exact same credits to train their models. It was an accounting masterclass. Microsoft was guaranteed to collect 75% of OpenAI's profits until that entire $13 billion investment was fully recouped. Analysts projected the tech giant would be completely paid back by 2026. But there was a catastrophic flaw in that timeline. You cannot collect 75% of profits that do not exist. By 2025, OpenAI was hemorrhaging cash at an unprecedented scale, losing roughly $11.5 billion in a single quarter. Because Microsoft structured the deal using the equity method of accounting, those massive losses landed directly on Microsoft's own balance sheet. They were forced to quietly disclose a devastating $4 billion pre-tax hit in 1 quarter alone. Instead of sitting back and collecting a steady stream of passive AI profits, Microsoft found themselves absorbing billions in losses every 3 months. But the financial bleeding was only the beginning of the betrayal. Microsoft had built this entire grand strategy on the assumption that they were the exclusive cloud provider for the artificial intelligence revolution. They believed they held the only keys to the kingdom. Silicon Valley, however, is not known for its loyalty. OpenAI realized they needed more computing power than one partner could provide, and they began to quietly shop around. They signed a staggering $300 billion deal with Oracle. They signed a $22 billion deal with CoreWeave. And then came the lethal blow to Microsoft's ego. OpenAI struck a $38 billion 7-year agreement with Amazon Web Services. When the dust finally settled, Microsoft still held their equity, but they had completely lost their exclusive status. They went from being the sole backbone of the world's most important AI company to capturing roughly 22% of where OpenAI's money was actually going. The relationship that was supposed to define the AI era had been fractured, leaving Microsoft as just one option on a rapidly expanding list of vendors. With their infrastructure dominance severely compromised, panic began to set in at the executive level. Microsoft needed a new way to justify the tens of billions they were pouring into AI hardware every single quarter. They turned to the one strategy they had always relied on to survive: enterprise lock-in. Microsoft has roughly 440 million commercial subscribers trapped inside their Microsoft 365 ecosystem. These are corporate employees who live inside Word, Excel, Teams, and Outlook every single day of their professional lives. The plan was remarkably simple. Build an AI assistant directly into all of those products, name it Copilot, and charge an extra $30 per user every single month. The financial projections presented to the board were euphoric. Microsoft hired Forrester Consulting to publish a study projecting that businesses would see a massive return on investment, ranging from 137 to 367%. Executives proudly took to the stage to declare that 70% of the Fortune 500 had already adopted Copilot. But that 70% figure was a carefully constructed corporate illusion. In the enterprise software world, adoption usually just means a small-scale pilot program. It means a company buys a handful of licenses to test the waters before committing their budget. When you look at actual enterprise-wide global deployments across those massive corporations, the number plummets to a catastrophic 6%. 72% of companies remain entirely locked in the pilot phase, refusing to expand their investment. Out of their massive subscriber base, only a dismal 3.3% of Microsoft 365 users are actually paying for the tool. Internally, the reality of this failure was impossible to hide from the sales teams. In one major US Azure unit, less than 20% of salespeople were hitting their targeted quotas. The crisis became so severe that Microsoft was forced to quietly slash their AI sales growth targets in half for the current fiscal year. You do not cut your primary growth targets in half if the revolution is going according to plan. The reason nobody was buying Copilot was devastatingly simple. The product was fundamentally broken. Users who shelled out the premium price quickly discovered that Microsoft's highly touted AI was more of a hindrance than a help. When a user asked Copilot to alter a complex document, modify an Excel file, or adjust a PowerPoint presentation, it rarely performed the actual task. Instead, it generated a list of vague, confusing instructions telling the user how to do the work themselves. People do not pay $30 a month for a glorified help menu. They pay for automation, and Copilot simply could not deliver. The backlash from the corporate world was swift and brutal. A net promoter score tracking Copilot's accuracy plunged from -3.5 to -24 in the span of just 2 months in late 2025. Among users who abandoned the software entirely, 44% cited a profound distrust of the answers it provided. The system suffered from severe memory loss, frequently crashing or slowing down to an unusable crawl after 15 to 20 questions. The performance gap between Microsoft's expensive paid tool and free alternatives was impossible to ignore. Consumer surveys showed ChatGPT hitting a 97% satisfaction rate for ease of use. Copilot lagged far behind at 86%. It became an open, embarrassing secret in the tech world. Even Microsoft's own software engineers preferred paying out of pocket for competitors like ChatGPT and Claude because their own flagship AI simply could not keep up. When a company's own developers refuse to use their flagship product, the narrative is already dead. The crisis extended to the developer market, a space Microsoft thought they owned. They purchased GitHub to control the world's code, but their coding assistant is rapidly losing ground. A competing platform called Cursor hit $2 billion in annual revenue by early 2026. Anthropic now captures an estimated 54% of the coding AI market. Microsoft was so desperate that they instructed thousands of their own engineers to test Anthropic's Claude alongside Copilot just to figure out why they were losing. But rather than accept reality and fix the underlying technology, Microsoft chose aggression. They decided that if users wouldn't willingly adopt their AI, they would forcefully inject it into their workflow. They shoved Copilot into every conceivable corner of the Windows operating system. They jammed a Copilot button into Notepad. They added AI suggestions to the Photos app and the File Explorer. They even mandated a dedicated Copilot hardware key on all new PC keyboards. Users were furious. They had paid thousands of dollars for their machines only to have their operating system hijacked by an AI they never asked for and could not easily disable. Then, Microsoft unveiled a feature that shattered whatever fragile trust remained. They called it Recall. Announced with massive fanfare as the centerpiece of a new PC category, Recall was designed to take a screenshot of your computer every few seconds. It would run those images through a local AI, allowing you to search everything you had ever seen, typed or done on your screen. Microsoft enthusiastically marketed it as a photographic memory. Cybersecurity experts immediately identified it as a built-in keylogger. The terrifying reality was that these intimate screenshots were stored in a local database that was completely unencrypted by default. Within days of the announcement, an independent developer built a simple tool that could instantly extract every single screenshot from that database. It was a surveillance disaster of unprecedented scale. Microsoft was forced to pull the feature in disgrace before it even shipped, delaying it an entire year just to add basic encryption. By the time it finally limped into the market, fewer than 10% of Windows 11 PCs had the specialized hardware required to even run it. But the security failures did not stop with Recall. Researchers uncovered a zero-click vulnerability inside Copilot known as EchoLeak. This wasn't a minor bug. It was a critical exploit with a severity score of 9.3. A single specially crafted email could silently trigger the exploit, allowing attackers to siphon sensitive, confidential data directly out of an organization's SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. The victim didn't even have to click a link or open the email. The AI would simply hand over the data. Security analysts pointed out that the underlying design flaw was painfully basic. The AI agent was processing trusted enterprise data and untrusted external data in the exact same thought process. Nearly 50% of IT leaders openly admitted they lacked the confidence to manage the severe security risks Copilot introduced to their networks. Chief information security officers realized that deploying this AI meant opening a permanent backdoor into their own infrastructure. The endless bugs, the privacy violations, the forced integration, and the aggressive monetization finally broke the public's patience. A new, highly derogatory nickname for the company began trending across social media and developer forums: Microslop. It became so widespread that developers created Google Chrome extensions specifically designed to automatically replace the word Microsoft with Microslop on every single web page. Microsoft's response was panicked, defensive, and deeply insecure. They began outright banning the word on their official Discord servers, locking down channels amidst the intense community backlash. But censoring a word cannot stop a cultural shift. People are leaving. Windows, the unassailable monopolistic fortress of personal computing, is showing massive, undeniable fractures. When Windows 11 originally launched, the operating system controlled roughly 75% of the global desktop market. By January 2026, that number had slipped to 67.6%. Mac OS and Linux are steadily, quietly climbing. Apple's new MacBook Neo is surging in popularity, offering a premium alternative to the bloated Windows ecosystem. Entire governments are abandoning the platform. The French government completely ditched Windows in favor of their own proprietary Linux distribution. Users are finally realizing that the lock-in economics that once defined Microsoft's absolute power are no longer worth the daily friction. Microsoft spent tens of billions of dollars trying to buy the future. They moved faster than anyone else in the industry. They leveraged their vast, deeply entrenched enterprise monopoly to try and force a revolution. And yet, they are watching the era of artificial intelligence take shape without them at the center. They lost their board influence with OpenAI. They lost their absolute cloud exclusivity. They alienated their core consumer base, and they built a flagship enterprise product that over 96% of their own customers actively refuse to pay for. For decades, Microsoft won not because they had the best product, but because they had the best distribution. They operated under the cynical assumption that they could build an inferior system and force you to use it because you had nowhere else to go. But this time, the formula broke. You cannot extract recurring monthly revenue from a product that simply does not work, and you cannot force a fundamental paradigm shift onto a global user base that no longer trusts your motives. But here's what nobody's asking. Why now? That question leads somewhere uncomfortable, and we already went there in how NVIDIA grew from gaming to AI. Giant now powering ChatGPT.